Alex couldn't remember the last time he felt this happy about getting off work early. All day, he'd braced himself for another grueling night shift, only to have the schedule change at the last minute, letting him leave by 11 p.m. grinning and feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Alex hopped in his car and headed home. He couldn't wait to surprise his wife, Megan. The thought of her smile when she saw him filled him with anticipation. He imagined them relaxing together after a long day, something they hadn't done in far too long. Megan wasn't expecting him home until morning, so Alex decided to make the moment even more special. On his way, he swung by the store and picked up a bottle of wine and a fresh bouquet of flowers, small tokens to show her how much he appreciated her. When he finally pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Megan's car wasn't in the garage, and the house was dark. It struck him as odd, but he brushed it aside, figuring she'd run out for a late-night errand. Still, as he stepped through the front door, the eerie silence made his skin crawl. No lights. No signs of Megan. The stillness of the house was almost unsettling. Where could she be? Alex muttered under his breath, fishing his phone out of his pocket. He dialed her number, drumming his fingers on the countertop as the line rang. When she finally picked up, her tone caught him off guard. Alex? Megan's voice sounded distant, almost irritated. Hey, where are you? I got off work early, Alex said, trying to keep the excitement in his voice. A heavy pause filled the air before she finally replied, her words colder than he'd ever heard. I'm not coming home tonight. Alex froze. What? What do you mean you're not coming home? Should I spell it out for you? Megan snapped, her voice dripping with frustration. I'm busy. I've got urgent work to take care of. I'll be back tomorrow. His heart pounded as unease began to creep in. Megan, what's going on? Why are you acting like this? Alex, just leave me alone. Don't call me again tonight, she said, dismissing him completely. Before he could respond, the line went dead. For a moment, Alex just stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at the empty house around him. Megan had never spoken to him like that before, cold, dismissive, almost like he was a stranger. His confusion quickly gave way to anger. Her behavior wasn't just strange, it was downright disrespectful. His jaw clenched as he stared out at the dark driveway. Something was wrong, he could feel it. He wasn't going to let this slide. Whatever was going on, he was determined to get answers. The next morning, Alex sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched, his mind racing. He heard the familiar rumble of Megan's car pulling into the driveway, and his heart thudded in his chest. The front door opened, and there she was, walking in as if nothing had happened. Morning, she said casually, barely glancing at him before heading straight for the stairs. I'm going to take a shower. Alex's stomach churned. She wasn't even going to explain herself. Not a single word. The tension in the air was unbearable, but he bit his tongue, deciding to hold off, for now. Let her think everything was normal. When he heard the water running upstairs, Alex's instincts kicked in. Something didn't add up, and he wasn't the type to ignore his gut. Steeling himself, he walked outside and went straight to her car. Placing his hand on the hood, he felt the faint warmth still lingering from her drive. Alex slipped into the car, his heart pounding as he scanned the interior. His eyes locked onto the tablet Megan always used for navigation. Hands trembling, he tapped through the recent destinations. One address leapt off the screen, 251 Oakwood Drive. It was a house on the far side of the city, nestled in a quiet neighborhood. She had been parked there all night. For a moment, Alex just stared at the address, his pulse hammering in his ears. What could she possibly have been doing there? Before his thoughts could spiral any further, he opened the glove compartment, not even sure what he was searching for. What he found sent a chill down his spine. An open box of condoms. One was missing. Alex's breath caught in his throat. They hadn't used condoms in years, there was no reason for these to be in her car. His hands felt clammy as he closed the compartment, his stomach twisting with a sickening realization. The pieces were coming together, and the picture they painted was one he didn't want to see. He walked back into the house, the sound of the shower still running upstairs. Slumping into a chair at the kitchen table, Alex stared at the floor, his thoughts racing. The minutes dragged by, each second building his frustration. When Megan finally came downstairs, her wet hair wrapped in a towel, she looked calm, almost indifferent. Her casual glance in his direction faltered when she saw his expression. "What?" she asked, her voice tinged with defensiveness. Alex met her gaze, his voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." Megan rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "About what now?" "About where you were last night." He held her car keys in his hand, his stare unrelenting. Megan's face darkened. "What the hell, Alex? You were snooping in my car? Going through my stuff? Answer the question." His voice sharpened, frustration bubbling just below the surface. "Whose house is 251 Oakwood Drive? Why were you there all night?" For a fleeting moment, something flickered in Megan's eyes, guilt? Defiance? Alex couldn't quite tell. But then she straightened her back, folding her arms tighter. "It's Peter's house," she said, her tone unnervingly flat. Alex felt his chest tighten. "Peter? The guy from your office?" "Yeah," Megan replied, her voice maddeningly calm. "I stayed the night there." Alex's fists clenched as he fought to control the anger rising inside him. "You think I'm a fool, Megan? You spend the night at another man's house, I find condoms in your car, and you expect me to believe nothing happened?" Megan's eyes narrowed, her tone hardening. "So what if I stayed there?" "It's not what you think." "Then what the hell is it?" Alex's voice rose, the frustration spilling over. "Tell me, was he your lover?" Megan let out a slow breath, her defensive edge softening just slightly. "No, Alex. Peter's not my lover." Alex's patience wore thin, his glare demanding answers. "Then why? Why were you there? And don't you dare lie to me, I deserve the truth." Her posture shifted, the irritation on her face giving way to something colder. "Fine. I'll tell you. I had some problems at work," she began, her voice clipped. "Peter helped me out. He covered for me with the bosses. If he hadn't, I might have lost my job. I went to thank him." Alex's jaw tightened, disbelief etched across his face. "Thank him? So, what, you slept with him out of gratitude?" Megan didn't flinch. Her calmness was infuriating. "It wasn't like that," she said plainly. "It wasn't cheating, Alex. It was just a transaction. A voluntary, honest deal. No emotions involved." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. "You gave him something?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You mean he couldn't even finish the sentence. You slept with him? As some kind of reward?" "Yes," Megan said simply, her tone devoid of remorse. "It was my idea, not his. He didn't ask for it. I just knew he found me attractive. So I made the choice." Alex's blood ran cold. "You slept with him like it was nothing? Like it didn't mean anything?" "Yes," she repeated, unflinching. "It wasn't about feelings. It was just a practical solution." Alex stared at her, utterly speechless. He couldn't find the words to describe how absurd and heartless her explanation sounded. You sold yourself for your career?" Megan didn't flinch, her expression calm, almost detached. "I gave him a little happiness in exchange for the help he gave me. That's all." Alex's chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking in like a heavy stone. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Megan, how could you possibly think that was okay?" She shrugged as if his outrage was unwarranted. "It was a professional courtesy. He did me a favor, and I returned it. That's it." Alex felt his world crumbling around him, his sense of trust shattered. He opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted by her smooth, unbothered tone. "Alex," she said, her voice unnervingly composed, "I don't think we should dwell on this. I know you're upset, but you're my husband, and I love you. One night, one mistake, it shouldn't be the reason to throw away everything we've built together." She said it so casually, as though she was addressing a minor inconvenience. Alex's mind spun, his heart pounding in disbelief. She wasn't just asking for forgiveness, she was treating this like it was something they could sweep under the rug. "Let's just forget about it," Megan added, her tone light, almost dismissive, as if she were suggesting they overlook a parking ticket. Alex didn't reply. His throat felt tight, his mouth dry. He was overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd done, and how easily she was brushing it aside. Megan's gaze drifted to the bouquet of flowers on the counter, the one Alex had picked up the night before to surprise her. A soft smile spread across her face, as though nothing was wrong. "Wow, honey, are these for me?" she asked, walking over to admire the vibrant petals. She didn't wait for an answer. "You're so sweet." She turned her attention to the bottle of wine he'd brought home and, with casual ease, popped it open. Grabbing 2 glasses from the cabinet, she poured drinks for both of them, acting as if their conversation moments ago hadn't happened. Handing him a glass, Megan raised her own in a breezy toast. "Alex, I'm sorry. Maybe I made a stupid decision, but let's just put it behind us and move on." Her tone was light, even playful, as she took a sip of her wine, her eyes watching him over the rim of her glass. Alex sat frozen, the glass of wine cool against his palm. He looked at her, trying to comprehend how she could be so nonchalant, so completely indifferent to the devastation she'd caused. The way she effortlessly brushed aside her betrayal, as if her charm could erase it, made his blood boil. She wasn't sorry. Not even close. She wasn't even pretending to be. This wasn't a mistake to her, it was just business. Without a word, Alex drained his wine and stood. Megan gave him a curious look, but he couldn't stay in that room another second. The air felt heavy, thick with her lies and indifference. He needed space, a moment to think. Stepping outside, Alex inhaled deeply, the chill of the morning air biting at his skin. He paced across the porch, running a hand through his hair as his thoughts spiraled. Megan's betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was how little she seemed to care. She expected him to brush it off, to play the part of the forgiving husband while she carried on as if nothing had changed. But Alex wasn't a fool. He could see the truth now, this wasn't some one-time lapse in judgment. Her coldness, her calculated indifference, it was clear that what she'd done wasn't a mistake at all. It wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. A calculated, selfish decision. Megan thought she could trample over Alex's dignity, make him out to be the fool. But she was wrong. If she wanted to play games, he'd let her think she was winning. For now. The more he thought about it, the clearer his plan became. She wanted him to feel small, powerless. Fine. He'd let her believe she'd succeeded. But before she walked away from this unscathed, before the divorce papers landed in her lap, Alex would ensure she understood the cost of her betrayal. He didn't want something messy or cruel, just a quiet, elegant revenge. Something she wouldn't see coming. Standing on the porch, watching the first light of dawn stretch across the sky, Alex allowed himself a small, wry smile. Megan thought she held the upper hand, thought she could manipulate him into submission. But she was about to learn what it felt like to be played. It was time to call a lawyer. But first, there was a surprise to plan. As Alex pieced together his strategy, one thing became clear: Megan's weakness was her career. If her job mattered so much that she'd sell out her marriage for it, then that was where he would strike. But he needed to be smart. He needed an alibi, something ironclad to keep suspicion far away. Taking a deep breath, Alex headed back inside, slipping into the role of the forgiving husband. Megan was in the kitchen, sipping her wine as if nothing had happened. She glanced up when she heard him and, noticing the softer tone in his voice, her face relaxed. "Megan," he said, forcing a small, tentative smile as he sat across from her. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "Yes?" "I've been thinking," Alex began, carefully choosing his words. "Maybe you're right. We've been through a lot together. One mistake shouldn't tear us apart." Her smile returned, faint at first, but then warmer as she realized he was coming around, or so she thought. "I knew you'd see reason, Alex. We're stronger than this." He nodded, swallowing the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Let's move on. I don't want to lose what we've built." Megan's expression softened further. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said, her tone warm, as though everything had fallen back into place. Alex squeezed her hand lightly, his face unreadable, though his thoughts raced ahead. She had no idea she was walking straight into his plan. The next morning, Alex was ready to make his first move. At work, he went straight to his boss's office and knocked on the door. John, his manager, waved him in, looking up from his computer. "Alex, what's up?" John asked, leaning back in his chair. Alex adopted a casual tone. "John, I need a favor. I'd like to request a business trip to our production site in the next city." John raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "A business trip? That's not like you to ask. Why now?" Alex shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I've been under a lot of stress lately. I think getting away for a bit could help. Plus, it's been a while since anyone's checked on the production site. It'd be good to see how things are running out there." John leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to send someone out there for an inspection. This could be a good opportunity for you. How long are you thinking?" "A week should be plenty," Alex said, already envisioning how everything would play out. John nodded. "All right. I'll get the paperwork sorted today." As Alex left the office, a sense of satisfaction settled over him. Megan might have underestimated him, but she was about to find out just how far he was willing to go. "You'll have everything you need by the end of the week," John said, leaning back in his chair. "Thanks, John. I really appreciate it," Alex replied, the faintest hint of satisfaction flickering behind his calm demeanor. Later that day, the official documents arrived: signed authorization, company approvals, and everything else required to make the trip completely above board. His alibi was perfect. When Alex got home that evening, he made sure to casually bring up the trip. Over dinner, he slid the paperwork across the table toward Megan. "Looks like I've got a business trip lined up," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "I'll be gone for a week, starting Monday." Megan picked up the papers, her eyes scanning them briefly before handing them back. "A week, huh? Well, I guess I'll miss you, but work is work, right?" "Exactly," Alex replied, his voice steady. "Just part of the job." Megan smiled faintly, showing no sign of suspicion. She believed him completely, and that was exactly what Alex needed. Over the next few days, he focused on setting his plan into motion. With his alibi secured, Alex began reaching out to find the perfect accomplices. After some research, he connected with a group of young event planners known for organizing flash mobs, creative pranks, and elaborate public stunts. Their unconventional approach was exactly what he needed. Alex met with the team at a small cafe a few miles from his house. The planners leaned forward as he explained his vision, their curiosity growing with every word. "So, you want us to stage a show?" one of them asked, intrigued but trying to wrap their heads around the request. "Exactly," Alex said, his tone firm. "I need it to be subtle but impactful. Something that will make her question everything. It has to feel personal, like she's being exposed for who she really is, but nothing that crosses the line into cruelty." The group exchanged excited glances, already brainstorming ideas. "We can do that," one of them assured him with a confident grin. "Trust me, if you want her to feel the heat, we'll deliver. She won't know what hit her." By Monday morning, everything was in place. Alex left for his business trip, with all the official documents neatly packed in his briefcase. Megan waved him off, seemingly convinced that everything between them had returned to normal. She had no idea what was coming. That morning, like any other, Megan began her routine with a stop at the cafe near her office. The familiar smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air as she stepped inside, feeling a sense of comfort in the predictable start to her day. She placed her usual order, a coffee and a croissant, and stood by the counter, scrolling on her phone as she waited. When her drink was ready, Megan reached out to grab it, only to pause as a man in a sharp business suit stepped up beside her. He looked at her for a moment, as if placing her face, before a sly smile spread across his lips. "Oh, it's you," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "I recognized you." Megan blinked, unsure how to respond. "Excuse me?" "You're the woman who's famous for thanking her colleagues at work, in bed." He chuckled, his tone unsettlingly amused. "How thoughtful of you." The words hit Megan like a slap. She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smirked, his gaze unwavering. "It's rare to meet someone so generous. Not many people would go that far for their coworkers." Before she could muster a response, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned and speechless. Her mind raced as she stood frozen, her coffee growing cold in her hand. Surely, this was some kind of mistake. He must have confused her with someone else. But as Megan glanced around, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that everyone in the cafe had heard the exchange. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She swallowed hard, trying to regain her composure, but the knot in her stomach refused to ease. Shaking off the unsettling encounter, Megan grabbed her coffee and croissant, determined to move on with her day. Strange people said strange things all the time, it didn't mean anything, she told herself. Still, the man's words lingered in her mind, an uncomfortable echo she couldn't quite silence. The next morning, Megan found herself back at the cafe, trying to push away the lingering unease. It was just a coincidence, she thought. People sometimes confused others for someone else, it happened. As she stepped up to the counter to place her order, an impeccably dressed elderly gentleman shuffled up beside her. His eyes widened as he looked at her, and he turned to her with a warm, almost reverent smile. "Oh, madam," he exclaimed, his voice filled with admiration. "I've heard about your generosity. Truly inspiring, what you've done. Sharing your body for career success. Such a remarkable sacrifice." Megan froze. Her face went pale as the pit in her stomach grew heavier. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. "What are you talking about?" The man chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, no need to be modest. Word travels fast about someone like you. So selfless, so accommodating in the workplace. Quite the story." With that, he gave her a kind smile and walked away, leaving Megan rooted to the spot, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she finally picked it up, her mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. Twice now, strangers had made these awful, insinuating comments. But how? How could they possibly know? She left the cafe in a daze, the weight of paranoia pressing down on her. As she walked to her office, her thoughts circled relentlessly around that night with Peter. No one knew about it. No one except him. By the middle of the week, Megan was on edge. She had convinced herself that the previous encounters were flukes, random and unconnected. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging sense that something was very wrong. That morning, she stepped into the cafe with trepidation. The moment she crossed the threshold, the familiar dread washed over her. Megan placed her order, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she waited. Just as the barista called her name, a young woman balancing a tray of drinks stepped up beside her. She smiled brightly, as though recognizing Megan. "Oh. You're that Megan, right?" the girl said, her tone cheerful. Megan stiffened. "What? My friend works with you and told me how kind you are. Especially to the men in the office." She winked playfully. "Thank you for being so caring." Megan's breath caught in her throat. Without a word, she snatched her coffee and bolted out of the cafe. By the time she made it to her office, her heart was pounding, and her mind was spinning. This wasn't random anymore. Someone knew, and somehow, the rumors were spreading. She sat at her desk, her phone heavy in her hand as she dialed Alex's number. The moment he picked up, her words spilled out in a panicked rush. "Alex, something weird is going on," she blurted. "People, strangers, they're saying things about me. About that night. It's like they know, Alex. They know." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alex finally spoke, his tone sharp and laced with irritation. "Megan, why are you bringing this up again? I thought we agreed to forget about it." I know," she stammered, her voice cracking. "But this is different. Someone's spreading rumors, and I need to know. Are you involved in this?" Alex sighed loudly, his exasperation clear. "Megan, seriously? You think I'm behind this? I told you, I've moved on. Why can't you?" "Alex, please," she pleaded. Listen," Alex cut her off, his voice firm. "I'm busy with work. I don't have time for this nonsense." A moment later, Megan's screen lit up with a video call. Alex appeared, walking briskly across a production floor, wearing a hard hat and safety vest. "See," he said, gesturing around him. "I'm here handling real work. I don't care about the past, Megan. Let it go." The call ended abruptly, leaving Megan staring at her phone, the weight of his dismissal settling heavily on her chest. "Stop bothering me with this," Alex said sharply before ending the call. Megan stared at her phone, her heart sinking. She felt foolish for even reaching out, but the strange encounters and biting comments had unraveled her nerves. "I'm sorry," she had whispered to no one, her words lost in the silence of her office. As she sat back in her chair, her mind churned with confusion and fear. How could anyone know? She had been so careful. Then, like a cold wave crashing over her, the realization hit: Peter. He was the only other person who knew. Had he betrayed her? Or had he let something slip? The thought twisted her stomach into knots. She needed answers. Her secret was no longer hers, and she couldn't shake the eerie feeling that it was unraveling faster than she could control. Determined, Megan stood and headed toward Peter's office. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step fueled by her growing frustration. When she reached his door, she opened it quietly, stepping inside and closing it softly behind her. Peter looked up from his desk, surprised to see her. He was completely unaware of the storm about to crash down on him. "Megan?" he asked, confused. She leaned in close, her voice a tense whisper. "Peter," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Did you tell anyone about our meeting?" Peter's brow furrowed, his confusion deepening. What? Megan, what are you talking about? You know what I mean, she snapped, keeping her voice low. That night. Did you open your mouth and tell anyone? Peter's face paled as understanding dawned. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. Of course not. I wouldn't. Don't lie to me, Megan said, her voice sharp with anger. If management finds out, we're both done. You know the company's rules. No romantic relationships between employees. She stepped closer, her frustration bubbling over. Are you stupid? Do you have any idea what could happen to both of us if this gets out? Peter raised his hands defensively, his expression one of genuine alarm. Megan, I swear, I didn't tell anyone. I wouldn't risk my career over this. You know me better than that. She studied his face, searching for any sign of dishonesty. But all she saw was confusion and fear. Her anger simmered as she took a step back, her heart pounding even harder. If Peter wasn't the one spreading the rumors, then who was? Leaving his office, Megan felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. The encounters, the comments from strangers, it all spiraled in her mind, refusing to make sense. Was she losing her mind? Or was someone playing a cruel game with her? The rest of the day dragged on, each passing minute weighed down by her growing paranoia. By the time Megan was ready to leave the office, her nerves were frayed to the edge. She clutched a folder of documents tightly to her chest as she stepped outside, lost in thought. Suddenly, someone collided with her. The impact sent her stumbling, the folder slipping from her hands as papers scattered across the pavement, caught in the breeze. Oh, I'm so sorry, the young man said quickly, crouching to help her pick up the scattered documents. Megan knelt beside him, biting back her irritation. It's okay, she said, her voice strained as she gathered the papers. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention. As she reached for the last of the documents, the man handed it to her with a smooth smile, his eyes glinting with something unsettling. No need for verbal thanks, he said, brushing himself off as he stood. Megan froze, the tone of his voice sending a shiver down her spine. She stood slowly, clutching the folder to her chest, her pulse racing. There was something about the way he looked at her, the way he smiled, it wasn't right. Without another word, the man turned and walked away, leaving Megan standing there, her heart pounding in her ears. You can thank me by giving me a night with you, for saving your documents, the man said, his grin widening as his words sank in. Megan's heart skipped a beat, disbelief flashing across her face. What did you just say? She asked, her voice trembling. The man leaned in slightly, his expression smug. I can see it in your eyes. You like thanking men, especially when it's career-related, right? Her temper flared, and before she could stop herself, she hurled the folder at him. You sick bastard, she shouted, her voice cracking with fury. Get out of here before I make you regret it. The man laughed, a low, sinister chuckle that sent a shiver down her spine. Without another word, he turned and sprinted down the street, disappearing around the corner before Megan could even think to react further. She stood frozen in place, her chest heaving as a mix of rage and fear coursed through her. The world felt as though it were crumbling beneath her feet. Everywhere she turned, someone seemed to know her secret, mocking her as if the entire city had found out. That evening, Megan sat alone in her dimly lit living room, a glass of wine clutched tightly in her trembling hands. She had barely touched her dinner, her stomach twisted in knots. Her mind replayed the events of the last few days on an endless loop, each incident piling onto her already frazzled nerves. Her heart raced, and no amount of wine seemed to steady it. The world felt unreal, warped by the constant barrage of humiliation and suspicion. How did they know? Or worse, was she imagining it all? The thought gripped her like a vice. Was her guilt over that night with Peter consuming her, pushing her toward paranoia? Megan's hands shook as she reached for her phone, opening her browser. She stared at the blank search bar, hesitating before typing, "psychotherapist near me." A list of names and addresses appeared on the screen, but Megan didn't click any of them. She simply stared, the reality settling in. Whether someone was playing a cruel game or her mind was betraying her, one thing was clear: she was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't control. By Friday morning, Megan was running on fumes. Her nerves were shot, and the week's bizarre encounters weighed heavily on her. Determined to avoid any further humiliation, she decided to skip her usual coffee stop and head straight to the office. If she could just throw herself into her work, maybe she could distract herself. Maybe she could feel normal again. She arrived early, slipping into her desk before most of the staff had even arrived. Furiously typing away, Megan tried to focus, her fingers moving across the keyboard as though the rhythm itself might drown out her spiraling thoughts. As employees trickled into the office, the usual morning chatter filled the air. For the first time in days, Megan felt a small wave of relief. The ordinary buzz of the office felt like a balm to her frayed nerves. Finally, she thought, some peace. But the calm didn't last. About an hour later, just as Megan was starting to feel grounded again, the office door swung open with a loud creak. A courier walked in, holding a massive bouquet of vibrant red roses. Heads turned, conversations quieted, and the sound of rustling papers stilled as everyone watched the courier make his way to the center of the room. Oblivious to the sudden tension in the air, the courier looked at the clipboard in his hand, then announced loudly, "Delivery for Megan." The words hit her like a physical blow. Megan's stomach churned, her pulse skyrocketing as she slowly stood. Every eye in the room was on her, the heat of their gazes almost unbearable. Several of her colleagues gathered around, their curiosity piqued, amusement flickering in their eyes. Megan's stomach churned as she approached the courier, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I didn't order anything," she said sharply, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why do you think these flowers are for me?" The courier shrugged innocently and reached for a small card nestled among the roses. Clearing his throat, he began to read, his voice carrying through the office. "For the sexiest and most divine Megan, who made me happy that magical night. Signed, Peter." The room fell silent for a split second before erupting into laughter and murmurs. Megan felt the blood drain from her face as the words echoed in her mind. Frozen in horror, she could hear the stifled giggles of her coworkers, their whispered comments, and the weight of judgmental eyes scanning her every move. Without thinking, she lunged forward and knocked the bouquet out of the courier's hands, scattering roses across the floor. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice trembling with fury and humiliation. "What kind of disgusting joke are you playing?" The room grew quieter, but laughter lingered at the edges as her coworkers exchanged glances. A few whispered behind their hands, while others openly stared. "Megan, relax," one of her coworkers said, a smirk playing on her lips that only fueled Megan's anger. But Megan couldn't calm down. Her nerves had snapped, and the humiliation was too much to bear. Adding to her misery, Peter wasn't even there to defend himself, he'd been sent to another office that morning at the boss's request. Megan's anger boiled over as she continued shouting, this time directing her fury at the courier, who now looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The door to Mr. Carter's office flew open, slamming against the wall. He stepped out, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. The commotion had clearly drawn his attention. "What the hell is going on here?" Mr. Carter barked, his sharp gaze sweeping over the scene, Megan standing amidst scattered roses, the courier backing away, and the note lying on the floor. He bent down and picked up the card, his expression darkening as he scanned its contents. Straightening, he turned to Megan. "Megan," he said sternly, holding up the note, "what is this? What have you done? What's going on here?" Megan opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind was a storm of rage, fear, and shame. Mr. Carter's voice grew sharper. Megan, I need an explanation. Did Peter send you these flowers? Are you two in a relationship? You're married, and you know the company policy. No. No. Megan screamed, her voice cracking. This is all a setup. Some kind of sick joke. I would never. Her words caught in her throat, and her hands shook as she gestured helplessly toward the scattered roses. Mr. Carter narrowed his eyes, his tone icy but measured. Megan, you're not making any sense. You're acting irrational. If Peter is involved in this, I need to know now. Otherwise, you're risking your career with this behavior. Megan's heart pounded as she looked around the room. The weight of judgment, the lingering laughter, and the suspicious stares pressed in on her like walls closing in. It's not true, she shouted again, but her voice was weaker this time, trembling with desperation. I don't know what's happening. Someone is trying to ruin me. Mr. Carter let out a long breath, pinching the bridge of his nose as he tried to maintain his composure. Megan, you need to calm down, he said firmly, his tone more deliberate now. Megan's eyes darted wildly around the room, the stares of her colleagues cutting through her like knives. Some looked amused, others pitiful, while a few exchanged smirks or whispered behind cupped hands. The humiliation was suffocating. Mr. Carter stood at the center of the chaos, his sharp gaze shifting between Megan and the gawking staff. He could see she was teetering on the brink of a breakdown, her face pale, her breathing ragged, and her hands trembling. He needed to defuse the situation before it spiraled any further, not just for Megan's sake but for the entire office, which was now abuzz with whispers and side glances. Clapping his hands together, Mr. Carter raised his voice in an attempt to regain control. All right, everyone, enough staring. Let's get back to work, he said, his tone cheerful, trying to inject some levity into the moment. What kind of prank is this, anyway? He added with a forced chuckle. Turning back to Megan, he softened his voice. Megan, calm down. Why don't you take a couple of days off to clear your head? We'll figure this out. Hey, maybe you and Peter can even take a lie detector test, he joked, the corners of his mouth twitching into an uneasy smile. Trust, but verify, right? He chuckled awkwardly, hoping to lighten the mood, but he failed to realize that Megan was already far beyond the point of reasoning. At his words, something inside her snapped. Yes, I slept with Peter, she screamed, her voice raw with fury and humiliation. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that seemed to amplify the weight of her confession. I rode him like a young stallion, and I enjoyed every second of it, she spat, her face flushed with both anger and shame. She gestured wildly at her co-workers, her voice rising. And all of you? You're just a bunch of miserable, nosy bastards who can't keep your noses out of someone else's life. Gasps rippled through the office as her words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Her co-workers exchanged wide-eyed glances, some in disbelief, others suppressing the urge to laugh at the sheer absurdity of the scene. Realizing what she had just said, Megan froze for a moment, the weight of her outburst crashing over her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she snatched her purse from her desk and bolted for the door, her sobs echoing through the stunned silence of the office. As she stormed out, Megan nearly collided with Peter, who had just returned from his assignment. He stopped short, his confident demeanor faltering as he took in her tear-streaked face and disheveled appearance. Tell them, Peter. Megan shouted, her voice thick with emotion. Tell them how we were tumbling around at your place. They're all dying to know the details because their lives are boring and gray, stuck in this miserable office. Peter froze in place, his face draining of color. His knees seemed to buckle slightly as he processed her words. His wide, panicked eyes darted around the room, taking in the sea of shocked faces. Megan, he stammered, his voice weak, why did you tell everyone about this? It was our secret. The weight of his words crushed the last bit of air from the room. So, it's true, Mr. Carter said, his voice low and heavy, stripped of any humor. His piercing gaze locked onto Peter. There was something going on between you two? Peter's head dropped, his face ashen. He stared at the floor as he mumbled, I didn't tell anyone. I swear I didn't. Mr. Carter sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose. Well, that's it, then, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for only the closest onlookers to hear. Straightening, he looked at Peter with a mix of disappointment and frustration. Peter, he said, his tone sharp, we need to have a conversation. Now. Without another word, Mr. Carter turned and walked toward his office. Peter hesitated, his eyes darting back to the murmuring crowd of co-workers before reluctantly following. As the door closed behind them, the office erupted into hushed murmurs. People exchanged glances, whispered hurried comments, and speculated about the shocking scene they had just witnessed. The weight of Megan's confession lingered in the air like a storm cloud, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next. Megan's breakdown, her shocking confession, and Peter's stunned reaction had plunged the office into chaos. Meanwhile, Alex returned home on Saturday, a mix of satisfaction and curiosity swirling inside him. He had orchestrated part of Megan's downfall, but he didn't anticipate how far things had spiraled out of control in his absence. The moment he stepped into the house, the tension was palpable. The air felt heavy, oppressive. He found Megan in the kitchen, slumped at the table with a glass of wine clutched tightly in her trembling hand. Her once confident demeanor had been replaced with a wild, broken look, a blend of despair and fury that made Alex pause. The instant Megan saw him, her expression twisted with rage. You, she screamed, rising unsteadily to her feet. You did this. You set me up, didn't you? You planned all of it. Alex instinctively stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of defense. Megan, calm down, he said, keeping his tone measured. What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. But Megan wasn't listening. Her anger boiled over as she advanced on him, her movements erratic, her eyes burning with accusation. You wanted to ruin me. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Megan, Alex said gently, trying to reason with her. I'm your husband. Why would I do that to you? I didn't arrange anything. Let's just sit down and talk, okay? Her hands shook violently as she stood inches from him, her face pale and twisted with rage. Then, without warning, she turned toward the counter and grabbed a large kitchen knife. Alex's breath caught as she turned back to him, the blade gripped tightly in her hand, her eyes wild and unfocused. I'll make you pay for this, she screamed, brandishing the knife. You think you can destroy me and just walk away? His heart pounded, but Alex forced himself to stay calm. Slowly, he backed away, pulling his phone from his pocket. Megan, he said evenly, his voice low but firm, put the knife down. You're not thinking clearly. You need help. Megan's grip on the knife tightened as she continued ranting, her words laced with venom. You ruined my life, Alex. You made me look like a fool. You're a monster. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Moments later, the police burst through the door, quickly assessing the scene. Megan was still screaming incoherently, the knife trembling in her hand. The officers moved cautiously, speaking to her in calm, measured tones as they disarmed her and led her away. Her face contorted in anguish, and her words dissolved into a stream of jumbled nonsense as they placed her in handcuffs. Alex watched silently, a strange mix of pity and relief settling over him. It was over. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed Megan with a severe nervous breakdown. She was placed under temporary psychiatric care, giving Alex the opportunity to finalize what he had been planning for weeks. While Megan was in treatment, Alex moved swiftly. He withdrew a significant sum of money from their joint account and transferred it into a private one. With his lawyer's help, he prepared divorce papers and ensured every detail was in place. When Megan returned home, she found the house empty. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of papers, divorce documents, and a note from Alex telling her not to contact him. The realization of what had happened hit Megan like a freight train. Her despair quickly turned to anger. Days later, she managed to contact Alex, her fury spilling out over the phone. "You stole from me," she shouted. "You took my money. You think you can get away with this?" Alex agreed to meet her face to face. When they sat down, his demeanor was calm, but his tone was ice cold. "I didn't steal anything, Megan," he said, meeting her glare without flinching. "But let me make something very clear. Our house cameras have footage of you attacking me with a knife. If you want to play this game, I'll press charges for attempted murder." Megan's expression faltered, her anger momentarily replaced with fear. You wouldn't," she stammered. "Try me," Alex said flatly, leaning forward. "You've already lost your grip on everything else. Don't give me a reason to take what little you have left." Megan sat back, her face ashen, her fury now tempered by the reality of Alex's words. She knew she had no leverage. Megan's face drained of color as Alex's words sank in. The gravity of the situation hit her like a freight train, her defiance crumbling under the weight of his icy resolve. Alex stepped closer, his tone calm but cutting, each word laced with finality. "You've lost it, Megan. You did this to yourself. I tried to move on, to live like nothing had happened, but your lies and your insanity destroyed everything." Her anger dissolved into panic. She looked at him with desperation in her eyes, her voice trembling as she whispered, You can't do this." "Oh, I can," Alex replied, his voice steady and unyielding. "And I already have. You're not getting a dime from me. You've lost everything. And if you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done." Megan's hands shook as the full weight of his words settled over her. She was cornered, with no options left. Defeated, she sat down, picked up the pen, and signed the divorce papers. It was the final blow in a series of devastating losses. Megan had lost her job, her reputation was in tatters, and Peter had been fired as well. Their office scandal had spread far and wide, becoming the subject of whispers and gossip, leaving no room for either of them to salvage their careers. Meanwhile, Alex walked away, his revenge complete. He had been patient, calculating, and methodical. Megan's own choices and actions had led to her downfall, and Alex had simply ensured there was no escape from the consequences. Free from the nightmare Megan had created, Alex closed the door on that chapter of his life. He moved forward, leaving the wreckage behind him with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was Alex's revenge, harsh, deliberate, and complete. He had played the role, bided his time, and in the end, Megan's own actions had sealed her fate.